Welcome to Pathways to Health, a podcast brought to you by the College of Health Sciences and Professions at Ohio University. I am Dean John McCarthy. Pathways to Health offers insightful journey into diverse health careers through engaging interviews with alumni and friends. We want to discover the realities of various health professions and the power of interdisciplinary collaboration in improving patient well-being. I'm here today with Frank Stevens, and I'm happy to talk with Frank about his pathways to health, and and that's really going to be a lot of our conversation today. I know, Frank, many people that the path is not always a linear one or a straight one. And that's why I made sure I had some time for us today to trace your path to how you got to where you are. So welcome and thanks for doing
Thank you.
this.
Of
And
course.
and yeah, let me hear a little bit about what your pathway looked like. Did where did you think you were going to start, and then where did you end up going on your path?
Yeah, my pathway was, when I enrolled in college 1970, middle of the Vietnam War. Um, and I thought, maybe being a doctor would be a fun thing, right? Now, that's not at all what my parents wanted. My parents wanted me to become a school teacher and come back home, teach school, whatever. And that had very little interest for me. Um, but I enrolled in school and I thought, well, I'm going to take psychology, biology, and English. But because you're a freshman, you don't always get what you ask for. So I ended up with calculus, thermodynamics, and English. And after that first quarter, I was pretty well convinced my mindset of having to figure out what the asymptote of XYZ divided by, I was never going to be a doctor. So um, I was really interested in psychology. I pursued that. I ended up I went through university college because I didn't want to do language. So I think to graduate I needed 45 hours, in the typical degree. I ended up with 88.
Wow.
So I got to take a lot of extra classes that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to take. I also got to take some interesting classes. Uh, Current international relations, ethics, classes I thought were kind of interesting, get a perspective of the rest of the world, and also kind of that ethical basis, to use in my life. So I graduated. I did get an internship at I think it was Tri-County Community Action Agency for the summer. Um, and then I was ready to go to work, and I came out in a recession.
Yeah.
So my first job was actually filing other people's unemployment claims. In Columbus, uh, getting a whopping $2.49 an hour. Um, and that was, I did that for a year or so. Then I actually got a job at St. Anne's Hospital. Now, this is the old St. Anne's that was in East Columbus, which was primarily a maternity hospital. But 3 community health centers had leased one section of the 4th floor to operate a 30-day intensive psych unit. And if we couldn't stabilize you in 30 days, then you went to the state hospital, which was in Athens.
Right. On the ridges.
So, yeah, so a lot of interesting stories that I could tell you about that experience.
So Frank, I mean, so you were at Ohio University, and I mean, even there as a student, are those places where you thought you would end up? I mean, doing any of that kind of
No,
work?
no, I was completely clueless. I really had, I can look back now and say, absent, the Vietnam War, and I had a deferment. So as long as you were in college, you didn't get drafted. And my draft number was 33, and they were already taken up to 130. So there was some motivation there. I probably wasn't ready to go to college.
Okay.
I was probably a late bloomer. And so, I think like many of my friends that I still see, we just had our 50-year reunion this year. Um, I don't know that any of us really knew, other than maybe one, Leslie. She knew she was going to be a physical therapist,
Right.
an athletic trainer. So other than her, everybody else was kind of like, we're not really sure what we're doing. Um, and so there, here I am, now I will say, when I look back, every job I had, whether in healthcare or not in healthcare, was a benefit to me in terms of my final ultimate career.
Yeah.
Right. There were a lot of building blocks. We talked before. I moved to Florida. I was tired of cold weather.
Right.
Moved to Florida. He got there. I interviewed at a psych hospital. The lady was like, "Oh, we want to hire you. You've got such great. I'll give you $2.74 an hour." Well, at the time, I had to eat.
Yeah.
So I'd taken a job working at a meat packing plant, making $6.10 an hour. And I'm like, "Lady, this doesn't work." So, there I was in Florida trying to figure it out. Somebody suggested, "Hey, you should get a job with the state." That's a good, okay. So you had to take a test. I took the test and I scored like a 96 or 96 and a half. And I kept applying for jobs and I never got called. So I finally called the state and said, "Hey, did I get lost in this somewhere?" And they were like, "Well, we never get below 98." I'm like, "So I'm never going to get a job?" They said, "Well, we have jobs that you can take that do not require this certification. And if you work there 6 months, then you can apply for any other job and you get priority." So I did it. I took a job working the midnight shift at a juvenile detention center.
Hmm.
Right. And here I am, I was a small guy, probably about 126 pounds at the time. Everybody else working there is like 6'5", 250 pounds. I'm like, okay, this doesn't look good. But I spent my 6 months there. And then I applied and I got a job working in the foster care program.
Okay.
So, again, and here I am, another experience. As a guy, they gave me a lot of the small infants and babies. And so I would often have to transport. If the foster mom couldn't take the baby to the doctor, I would have to transport it. I'd never diapered anybody before. So I had to learn how to diaper babies. I dealt with a lot of children that were really troubled, that had been through some pretty horrible things. And so I worked there for a year or so. And then the next kind of place you could go to was a place back then called single intake, which was kind of I don't know why they used that phrase. You were really an investigator for the state of Florida.
Okay.
And so I applied for the job. I got hired. I had to go through training. So there were two groups. There was what we call the delinquency group and the dependency group. Dependency is another interesting phrase for child abuse.
Oh, okay.
So I had to be trained as a child abuse investigator. I also had to be trained to investigate delinquencies, crimes committed by juveniles. And because I always try to excel, my boss would always give me the fun cases, like the murders, the rapes, the armed robberies, the kidnapping.
Wow.
So, a lot of experience. I had to write reports that went I'd send a report to the state attorney, report to the judge, report to the prosecutor, report to the defense. I would have to appear in court from time to time if the child was found guilty and it had such a record that they were going to commit it to some kind of a program. So again, I'm getting experience of doing responsible things. But it dawned on me one day, I was actually working 3 jobs at the time, full-time for the state, 2 part-time jobs, because I was trying to put some money in the bank. And I realized, somebody threatens to kill me every day. This is probably not a good thing.
I was gonna ask, I mean, were you enjoying this work? I mean, what was the experience? Did you feel like, "Hey, I'm doing important work," and that was fulfilling? Or what, what were you feeling or taking away from doing these jobs?
Yeah, I did feel like I was doing important work. One of the things that I learned that helped me throughout my career. One thing is going into a courtroom and being professional and whatever. The other one was learning how to manage your emotions.
Hmm.
What everybody else around you is not. Right? That is difficult to do, to be independently minded in situations where nobody else is. I remember getting called to a hospital to look at a burned baby. And the nurses and the doctors were out of their mind. They were just insane. The police had the parents and whatever. So my job was to interview and figure out what happened. And it turned out it was an accident.
Oh, wow.
The older daughter had went to cross the street because there was water problems at the child's house. The faucets were reversed, so she ran with scalding hot water. So again, there's a situation where I learned a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, you really learn a lot about yourself, building confidence. I mean, knocking on the door in the middle of the night and saying, "Hi, I'm here to investigate allegations of child abuse," um, it is not something that I expected to be doing when I was at Ohio University.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
it just,
I mean, I do find that one challenging of, on the one hand, you want to be empathetic, right? And you want to say, "Hey, what's going on with these people, with this person? How can I help?" And you want to try to understand that. But on the other level, you're right. You've got to be kind of a solid foundation, to have conversations when people are really escalating. How did you find your way through that? These are tough situations if you're trying to be empathetic a little bit here.
yeah, I wish I had a good answer. It's somehow the collection of my experiences up until that date helped me. And of course, the training and mentoring by my bosses, gave me that sense of confidence that I could walk into a room and go, "Okay, I'm the independent party. I'm here to do the investigation.
Yeah.
I'm not on anybody's side," which through my life and my career, that training as an investigator, those moments were very valuable to me as I continued my career. So having decided being threatened every day wasn't a good idea,
Yeah.
I went to graduate school. I still work full time as an investigator, and I went to graduate school full time, and I got my MBA from Nova Southeastern University.
Mhm.
Um, and it was the best way to describe it is a degree kind of in organizational analysis. So we had very interesting professors who gave us interesting perspectives. So the gentleman that taught finance had been a financial advisor to the Kennedy family.
Wow.
One of our professors had been on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So the gentleman who taught our last class was imprisoned in Poland for writing his master's thesis. And at that time, he was teaching both at Nova Southeastern, working at Columbia, but also working for NBC. So I came out, well, I've spent 2 years now. I spent it, my money to pay for this thing. I sent out 200 resumes. I got 2 responses and I got 1 interview.
Wow.
And the interview was not for the job I applied for. I applied for a job to run a multi-specialty clinic. And I was probably no more prepared to run a multi-specialty clinic than, my dog, right? I was but you come out, you got all this brain power, you've been, but the company was smart enough to look at my education, and they said, hey, they started asking me questions, and I'm like, what is this job they're talking? So I says, can I see the job description? And they handed it to me, and I said, oh, director of planning and analysis. Oh, that sounds like something I could do. And so when I went to, I had one suit, two shirts, one tie, and a pair of shoes. So I went through the first interview, and I thought, well, I haven't heard from them. And then I get a phone call, and I just interviewed for a supervisor's job at the state. They'd offered it to me. I'd accepted. I just got off the phone with her, and I get a call from the company that interviewed me. At the time, that was Cigna Health Plan of Florida in Tampa. And they said, could you come back out for a second interview? I'm like, yeah. So I run to my boss, and he's like, go, go, go. So I have to race home, change into my suit, have to iron my shirt, right? I race over to the office, and I'm excited. Second interview, and the lady says, well, we just want to offer you the job. I went, oh, okay, I'll take it. What are you going to pay me? And it was an 80% increase over what I was making, which tells you I was making very little.
Right.
But when I went in to talk to the boss, who was actually a year younger than me, the CFO was a year younger than me. I was one of the oldest people there. I said, what do you want me to do? He says, the first thing is you got to figure out why we can't make any money. Well, that's perfect. I'm trained to do that.
Okay.
So, I did that. It took me about 90 days to figure out what they were doing wrong. And so I took it to him. It was a very simple solution. And then I said, well, what would you like me to do next? And he said, well, I want you to go to that department and see why they're never on time. Why they're always behind and back up. And I was so grateful to that individual because he did that. He sent me from one department to another, and I got to learn every aspect of the company.
Yeah.
And then it was time to put in a new computer system. I had a key role in making sure that, let's stay on our project management. Let's get it done. And I absolutely loved the work. It was great not having somebody threaten to kill me every day.
But it still feels, a little clinical in that you're going in, you're assessing what's happening, and
Right.
trying to figure out, okay, well, what is the problem here?
Right.
And you're diagnosing.
Yeah. So I was kind of a combination of the education, so from Ohio University, one of the great values, I had all these hours in psychology and group dynamics. What you learn about organization, there's an organizational culture. There's also the dynamics of the management team or the dynamics of a particular department. And one of the things I learned in school was management by wandering around. I used to call that mumwa. And the theory was, if you go ask the people in the department what's wrong, they'll tell you.
Mm-hmm.
They know what's wrong.
Right.
Right? Why are we spending all this? Let's just go ask them. Now, they may not be able to create the solution, but they can give you ideas, which then you can take back, talk with the rest of the team and say, hey, let's put this solution together and implement it. So it was, I loved my job. It was a great group of people to work with. My boss left, and he was gone about, I don't know, 4, maybe 5, 6 months. And then I got a call from him one day, and he said, hey, how you doing? I said, well, I'm great. How are you? He says, I'm sitting here on the lanai overlooking the yacht harbor in Honolulu. I said, well, how nice. He said, yeah. He said, the company I'm working for, we just did a deal with them. We're going to put the management team in. And he says, I'm not a real big fan of Hawaii. He said, would you like to take my place? Now, let's put into context here.
Okay.
Young poor boy, Southern Ohio, thought maybe he might go to Hawaii once in his life. And these people want to pay me to live there.
Wow.
So I say yes.
I mean, Frank, it seems so thematic for you of just this idea of jumping into things, even that when they're pretty unknown. I mean, some of the jobs that you took, I mean, there's a lot you had known about what was going to happen there, and now you're going to move 3,000 miles away or more. W- have you always been like that? I mean, was that sort of always part of your personality of, yeah, I'll just jump in and do it?
No, I was really pretty shy. I mean, growing up, I grew up in Jackson, Ohio, and that was a Welsh community
Right.
back in the days. And the fight song was "Hail Fighting Welshmen," and then years later they changed it. But one of the things, we had this tradition there called a Steddfod,
Okay.
which is a Welsh tradition of singing. So from the kindergarten on, you had to stand up in front of an auditorium and sing a song, right?
By yourself.
So by yourself.
Wow.
So, you got used to, okay, well, this is new, right? But yeah, I think the person that I evolved into, I evolved because of the different jobs I had and the people I met.
Yeah.
And I can never undervalue the whole concept of a mentor.
Okay.
Right. I think that is, regardless of whether you're working at the supermarket and the head clerk's giving you advice, you're working in the meatpacking factory, you're working wherever you work, if you're fortunate enough to have a good mentor, that helps give you confidence and the willing to say, hey, try it.
Yeah.
Hey, one thing I learned, and that was, it's better to make a decision. And if it's not perfect, fix it, then not make a decision.
Okay.
And a lot of the things that I have found, I've spent my life basically going in and figuring out what's broken and fixing it. Right. And that, it's like, well, to me, my father sold farm machinery and was a mechanic. And I used to, he loved to fix things that were broken. And I think there was a part of me that, like, well, I like fixing companies, right? I like fixing what's broken. And I think I just, that to me has always been fun.
Yeah.
And I just, after my time in Hawaii, I took no time at all to fix the company in Hawaii. There was stupid things going on. We got it fixed, got to help the medical group figure it out. They were doing something silly in their accounting.
So how long
and then
were you there?
I was there about 2 years.
2 years. Okay.
And then I went to California, and I agreed to take a job that I didn't want. They begged me, just take a job for 6 months, and we want you to go back to Florida and negotiate contracts with doctors and hospitals.
Okay.
Okay. I'd done a little bit of that in the prior 2 companies. And so I ended up staying there for 10 years. And I had a team of negotiators. We negotiated the contracts in 41 states. I reviewed and signed all the contracts. So 15,000 contracts, hospitals, outpatient surgery centers, etc. 140,000 physicians nationwide. And so I did that. And then ultimately that company was going to get bought out. So I got bought out of that company. And then a guy that I worked with back in 1983 in Tampa at my very first healthcare job, so to speak, in managed care, he called me up and said, hey, I just got appointed the second conservator of this big company, Med Partners, that's in bankruptcy. And nobody in our consulting firm knows healthcare like you do. Would you be interested in contracting with us? Just be a contractor and help me.
Okay.
I said, sure, I'll do it. And he said, well, how much do you want an hour? And I told him, and he said, oh yeah, that's fine. I thought, probably didn't ask for enough. And so that started in April of 1999. And in June, they asked me to join the partnership and work with them. And so I was at that company. And that's, again, kind of doing the same thing, getting appointed to go into companies by the regulators, going in as a monitor initially, and then if they made bad decisions, taking over the company. Again, we talked earlier, the knocking on the doors.
Right.
Say,
like it.
So then I was walking in with a piece of paper in my hand to walk up to the CEO of a company and say, well, I'm sorry, but I'm taking over the company. You can go sit over there while I figure out what's going on here. So, those kind of things. I did a lot of, I did a lot of work there. I started doing expert testimony, simply because I had gathered so much experience.
Right.
And so a law firm that, I met, we would have these meetings. This is a huge bankruptcy, and we'd have a meeting, and there would be 50 or 60 attorneys in a room at a time.
Wow.
And we would be there as the independent monitor, reporting to the government as to what was going on. And so one of them called me up and said, hey, we think you could be an expert. Why don't you testify? And so I started doing that. Now I had the experience of being in the courtroom.
Right.
Right. And so I started doing that. And I did that for many, many years. And I swore I would never do it again, because the world's evolved. It's not as friendly a place in the courtroom or arbitrations anymore. Although I did agree to do one a year or so ago that was a pretty massive fraud case that I was testifying in.
Okay.
And then I did work. I went to the next place was Deloitte. They had recruited a group of us for about a year. And so I did some expert testimony there, but I did a lot of work with academic medical centers.
Oh, okay.
So that was, I got called in. They said, hey, we've got a project with UCLA. And they need to build an outpatient surgery center, but they need to figure out X, Y, and Z. And so I joined the team, and I listened in, and they sent me they've got a model they put together. And so I went to the model and said, this model's not right. It's got a $56 million error in it. So we need to do this the right way. And so I developed a long-standing working relationship with UCLA. I did multiple projects for them where I would basically look at, like they would say, we want to build this building. We want to put outpatient surgery in, which was going to be the cash cow.
Okay.
Then they were like, we'd like to put in 2 lanes of radiation oncology. Well, when I pulled the data, it said they barely had enough patients to do 1 lane, because the lanes were extremely expensive.
Okay.
And then they wanted to put in medical oncology. And I said, well, that's fine, but it's not going to have the profit margin it currently has, because your accounting department's going to bring it over here, and you're in an old building now. You're going to be in a new building. The administrative load you're going to get, it's not going to be profitable. So I did a lot of projects for them. I did projects for University of California, San Francisco, projects for University of California, Irvine.
And you Frank, you hadn't had a lot of experience with working with higher ed institutions, right? I mean,
I had not
before UCLA. Yeah. Did you find that was it a lot different? I mean, or were they just sort of another organization that had their quirks?
Yeah. The thing that helped. So, again, throughout my career, everything became, we use the phrase, or they use the phrase in the industry, what are the tools in your tool belt?
Mm-hmm.
So every job I had collected a tool in my tool belt. Right. So understanding how health insurance works, having negotiated contracts, understanding how contracted rates are paid, paying claims.
Right.
So when I went to UCLA, I'm like, you're taking averages of averages of averages. We need to just focus on, this is Blue Cross, this is Blue Shield, this is United. We're going to build our model that reflects their patients, the number of services they buy, and what they specifically get paid. That will give us an accurate model that you can. So what we do is build these. It'd be a pro forma model for 10 years. There have to be some assumptions built in. What are rates going to go up over the future? And then I would prepare this, and then they would send it to the Regents of California, who would provide the funding to the university.
Okay. Okay.
So it was just a matter of saying, oh, I know all about claims. I know about units and contracted rates. I'll just apply that in building the model for them.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me though of, you talked about walking around and learning things. You sort of walked around the country, you walked around the landscape of healthcare financing, and you really did just walk around different places and learn about aspects. And then when it came to apply it to a project, then you had those pieces. It sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the psychology, the group dynamics from Ohio University, my master's education, and then as the first job in healthcare and the second job in healthcare, and incorporating into the way I think. Right, there's again, the investigating, being calm, walking in, finding solutions, fixing things, feeling a sense of let's get it done. And so I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I was at one company, and the management team, they had they were in trouble with two different regulators, and we were there as a monitor. And so every week they had to write a report, and one of the two of us would have to read it and then send our comments to the government. So I read their little report, and then we do a conference call the next morning with the regulators. So I took it upstairs to the CEO, and they had more C-suite people than, Carter's Got Pills. And I said, so you the numbers in this report you've given me are not right. And the gentleman was close to my age, and he patted me on the shoulder and said, but they make us look a lot better.
Wow.
Well, there's a group dynamic there. So there are those kind of things where you just kind of shake your head and go, this is probably not going to work.
Yeah.
And then I had a call from a hospital system, big hospital system, said, you guys are denying, that was at inpatient admissions, and you're denying the next day of care, saying it's not. I said, okay, are you complaining about the denial? And they said, well, not necessarily the fact that you denied it, but that you waited 40 days after the patient was discharged to tell us. So I called that department together, and I said, hey, do you know what the rule is? The rule is, I said, first of all, you guys signed a contract with these people that makes it almost impossible to deny anything. Yeah. But number two, from a regulatory standpoint, we need to tell them, if you don't going to pay for tomorrow, you need to tell them by 3:00 today.
Yeah.
Right. I said, now, all the nurses got laptops and they've got modems and whatever. And I said, so we need to change the process. So, and I said, so how long do you think it'll take us to do that? And they said, probably 3 weeks. And I said, let me tell you how you're going to do it in the next 24 to 48 hours. And not being mean, right, but if you're doing it wrong, fix it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, that's part of learning the dynamics of an organization. And now that organization, which I won't disclose the name, that was a very interesting and very peculiar dynamics among the management team and each department.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes people will ask me, well, how do you fix these things? Well, I said, well, you have to have the right people in leadership. You have to have the right people on the board, right? The board needs to be educated. How they need to have a sense of governance, how we're going to manage this. But then you have to really change the culture of an organization from it's okay to do it wrong to let's just do it right.
Yeah.
So, again, now as I'm in my final years of career, I never thought I'd still be working at almost 73. I mainly do independent monitoring. I'm currently monitor for the California Attorney General for the merger of a hospital into a major hospital system. And, there's always the fear that, the merger will cause a price increase. And so they agreed to have a monitor, and they have certain competitive impact conditions. And then if somebody files a complaint, I have to investigate it, which I'm
Still there.
finishing up an investigation. But today I could actually do a lot more if I wanted to not play tennis or pickleball or lawn bowl or garden. But I do enjoy still. Part of it is I enjoy helping people be successful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. That to me in all my jobs, as I went up the food chain and got to be the person at the top, I always wanted to help other people be successful.
And I'm always looking for the things that cut across all health disciplines, and sort of
Right.
what do we have in common? And, I look around, at the College of Health Sciences and Professions, we've got over 70 different programs, certificates, and try to find out, well, what do we have in common? And there's definitely a helping orientation.
Yes.
And that's important. But what strikes me, Frank, is your ability to see all the different pieces and how they fit together. And I just wondered if you could talk just a little bit about that administrative side of healthcare, which sometimes can get a bad rap. But how what I frequently find is that people who are on that side of healthcare, they still share that idea of I want to help people. And so I guess I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about how does that administrative side really fit into a healthcare team, and how can it really help?
Yeah, it's I'll give you a couple examples.
Okay.
One I just thought of. I totally forgot about it. One of the doctors I worked at one company went over to the University of California, Irvine to run their student health center.
Okay.
Right. And so she called me and said, would you do some consulting work on the side? I said, well, okay, fine. She says, we have got a mess. Our system for appointments is screwed up. People are waiting 2 and 3 hours on walk-in. The nurses and doctors are fighting. And okay, let me wander around.
Okay.
And so it was one of those things of like, okay, the administrative stuff was getting in the way of the doctors and nurses being able to help people. Right. We can't see the patients. It's all messed up. Patients are waiting for whatever. Well, it was really pretty simplistic. At the root cause is their demand for appointments far exceeded their capacity. But the issue was most of these appointments were very simplistic. Right. And so I said, we're going to do this. We're going to have the appointment system, and we're not going to abuse it. We're going to make appointments. We're going to keep appointments. But we're going to have, like they have in the military, you show up. I said, you've got office, you've got clinic space you're not using. I want a doctor and 2 PAs or a nurse practitioner at the far end. And anybody who's walk-in goes to the walk-in clinic. Because your volume occurs between 9 and 10 o'clock. And then it occurs again between 1 and 2:30 in the afternoon. Right. So we will take people out of the appointment calendar, the professionals, put them for the walk-in clinic, right? Yeah. And so that way anybody that walked in, They were seen just like that. We eliminated. Again, fixing the administrative problems, right? In working with, the folks at UCLA, and the other university medical centers, it was really bringing they were used to running process.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't used to the things that I knew about,
Right.
and how to take that and show them so you can do it yourselves.
Yeah.
Right. So administratively, a lot of health plans, they have to make decisions on utilization management and this and that and the other. At one point at one company, we said, hey, of all the things that we prior authorize, which ones do we never deny? Yeah, then why are we prior authorizing?
Yeah.
We don't need to do that. I went into utilization management department and said, and so this was impacting the physical therapy group. I went and I said, okay, so I just want to watch you do your work. And she says, well, this is a patient needs physical therapy, and I'm going to approve 4 visits. And I said, and what did the doctor request? Well, they requested 8. I said, and what is the standard? Well, it's 8. Then why are you approving 4?
Yeah.
Do you usually reapprove the next 4? Oh, yes. Say, let's do this. Let's just approve the 8 to start with, and we'll move on.
Right.
We're going to get rid of the double work.
Yeah.
So sometimes, again, from a leadership perspective, we put people in jobs, but we don't provide them the training they need.
Mm-hmm.
We don't provide them the mentoring they need. Yeah. And we don't help them be successful.
Right.
Right. And so for me, in all the programs I've worked in, hospitals, physician groups, it's all about, we need to make our people successful.
Yeah.
How do we take out the crap that's making it difficult for them to be successful?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that evolves over time. As things change in an organization, you have to kind of relook at it and go, well, okay, things have changed. Let's talk about it. Yeah. How can we do this more efficiently?
Okay. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I wanted to come back to one other point, maybe just as we're coming up on time. You talked about mentoring, and now, Frank, at 73, are you now the mentor for other people, and do you find yourself in that role frequently?
Yeah, I mentor a lot of the folks that I work with. Mm-hmm. Obviously, even in my job as the independent monitor for the California Attorney General, the folks at the hospital system, they're like, well, what do you think we should do? Right? Here's so, I will kind of give them, here's my perspective on how you keep from stepping over the line. Yeah. Maybe, why don't we have a conversation with the AG? Alternatively, I have those kind of conversations with the AG team because they're attorneys. Right. They're not healthcare people, right? And so whether it's my clients or the folks I work with, I have a team of folks that support me. They're fantastic. But I don't expect people to have the drive or the goals that I had. Right. I need to help them achieve the goals that they have. Yeah. And I think that's really, from a mentoring standpoint, extremely important. You don't want to impose. I came out of graduate school, and the first thing was, I want to be a CEO. Well, I made it. Yeah. Right. But I don't expect other people to have that. I want you to be as successful as you want to be. You don't ever want to be a testifier, don't be a testifier. Right. You don't want the stress, that's fine. You don't want to be an independent monitor. You don't want to be a CEO. You don't want to do this kind of work. That's okay. Yeah. Do the work that makes you happy.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you talked about before, how do you create conditions so that people will be successful? And I think that knowledge of, okay, well, I have to understand how you are as a person, and then
Right.
let you be successful that way.
Yeah.
And the condition isn't going to be, well, I'm going to turn you into me. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's a tough one as a mentor.
Yeah. It's there was a time back in the 90s at one company, and I had my team in there and had my number two. And, I was just like, I could scream, right? I was just like, okay, the meeting's over. And so they left. And he said, do you know what the problem is? I said, no, what's the problem? He said, you see what you're talking about crystal clear.
Mm.
You see the problem, you see the solution. They can't even find the problem.
Yeah.
So that was great. It was a great comment from my number two. He said, okay, I've got to help them see it.
Right.
Because otherwise they'll never find the solution.
Wow. Well, I mean, I love kind of ending on that point. I know you and I talked before about there's so many different chapters we could unpack in different ways, but I like ending there just because on these pathways, sometimes I'll think, oh, is it going to make sense? Can people make sense of how did I get to where I am now? I feel like your journey, though, Frank, it does. I mean, you just talked about how one thing sets you up for the next, or how you can learn something from any experience. And I do find when I'm talking to students now and they feel this pressure of, I need to figure out what I'm doing. And that way I can then decide what experience I need to have to get me to that next spot. And I'll say, no, the experiences are going to help you figure out where you're headed, and they're going to be valuable. You may not see it right away though,
Right.
or when you're in it. Yeah.
And it may be a long journey.
Right.
Right. It's not like, hey, you got out of college and you're a CEO. It was a long journey.
Right.
And by the time I actually got to be the guy in charge, I realized all those experiences.
Yeah.
Ohio University, the investigator, the psych hospital, group dynamics, my master's degree, all those things prepared me to say, okay, I'm in the seat now.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be calm.
Yeah.
I have to be thoughtful. I need to surround myself with people that are as smart or smarter than I am.
Yeah.
Right. And then I need to listen to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, Frank, thanks so much. Really enjoyed the conversation today, and yeah, appreciated just hearing how those stories fit together. You've lived a fascinating life, I think, and so I can't say I've ever encountered that constellation of experiences ever from anyone I've talked to.
And we never got around to covering my work in South Africa, so that'll be another trip.
Another one. Okay, I'm sure it fits. Great. Well, Frank, again, thank you so much. Really appreciated the time today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right.
Good.
All right. I think that does it.
That was great.
And there. Yeah, really interesting.
You're really good.
Oh, thanks, Frank. Well, I just felt like your story just emerged from this. And I mean, I even was thinking as you were talking, like, we could just call this episode, either walking around or, learning by walking around or something like that, because that feels like your story. And, you went to these different places and you learned something each time that helped you get to the next spot. Yeah.
Yeah. I just, I look at the young people that, I mean, I remember being in that, 18 to 21 and feeling the pressure. I was feeling the pressure because I didn't want to go to the war. But then it was like, well, then what do you do when you get out of college?
Yeah.
And you're in the middle of a recession, and, there's high expectations. Mom and dad had saved money all their life so I could go to college, and you kind of go, you got to go do something. And you just realize, wow, other people that chose a different career, right? They come out, they got jobs, then I'm filing unemployment claims. you just realize it is a long journey
Yeah.
to get to where, and there's going to be twists and turns.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a lot of trust in that of saying, and a sort of optimism at some point of saying, I think this is going to work out and take me somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even, we didn't get in. My mom's was a social worker, and she said she did a number of different jobs as a social worker, but the one that was, where she just couldn't continue doing it was in Parents Anonymous, where there were abuse cases. And she just said,
Right.
as a young parent, it was too hard. And
Oh, yeah.
she had to walk away from it.
Yeah.
And so, but you did that and said, well, what am I learning from some of these cases? And that's really amazing.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there are some things I still can't talk about.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. Real.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Frank, I hope that the weather's going to lend itself to you getting outside for some of your activities out there today.
Yeah. Line bowling today at 2:30. So.
All right. You're all set. Okay. Well, thanks again. We're going to,
thank you.
Yeah, we'll be putting these pieces together and I'll keep you updated.
Great. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Have a great one.
You too.
Bye.